Hi everyone, welcome to another Inkspot review. I am Matt Armstrong, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Kaweco Ruby Red. So a quick thank you to Kaweco for sending me this ink. This ink was provided free of charge for review purposes. No other compensation was provided, and all opinions expressed herein are entirely my own and are in no way influenced by the fact that this ink was provided to me. So now that we've got that disclaimer out of the way, let me also, before we go on to the review, clarify something. The pile of ink you see behind me is not a store. It is not for sale. That is, I am almost ashamed to admit, my personal ink collection. So no, I am not running a store. No, you cannot place reservations for different inks. No, you cannot have the inks that are behind me. Those are for me. Those belong to me. And I heart them. All right, so let's dive in. So as I mentioned, today's ink is Kaweco Ruby Red. Now, this is an interesting red. It's kind of what I would consider as close to a true red as I have seen, and we'll go through it. So mine came in this little plastic box. I don't know if that's standard or not because this came directly from the manufacturer. Inside, you get a pretty commonly shaped bottle, and if you'll just allow me, it's the same shape bottle that you see for instance, Pelican. Same shape of bottle there. Caps are a little bit different. I'll get this out of the way here. The cap, it's got the nice paper label on it, and then the cap is flat across the top, has the paper tapes down the side. I don't really love these paper tapes that they use to indicate that the bottle has been closed. There's just no way to make them look good. I cut mine off with scissors before I opened the bottle. I did not do that on my Paradise Blue, and it just looks kind of sloppy. And for someone who can be a little on the OCD side, that kind of bothers me, but it's a minor thing. All right, so as I mentioned, clearly a pretty standard red, but let me walk you through how it looks in different pens, and then I'll talk you through the full-blown test that I did. So we are going to start right off. This is a Jinhao 599, and so this is our fine nib, and this is Kaweco Ruby Red. Fairly standard red color, and not a lot of shading that you see here. And we will switch over to the medium, which is a Lamy Vista. Medium. Ruby Red. Now this is a little on the drier side. You can start to see just a little bit of shading right there. Our next pen is a Lamy All-Star, which is a little bit wetter. This is a broad. Then we have, let's see, which one is next? Next is the TWSBI. VAX 700. This is a 1.1 millimeter stub. Then we've got a couple of fun pens here. So this is a Pilot Custom Heritage 912, and this is a Falcon nib, or also known as a Flex nib. And I'm not great with flex writing. I know that about myself, and I've come to peace with it, but that gives you a sense of what it looks like in a flex nib. I will say I've used this ink quite a bit in this pen. This ink doesn't seem to have a lot of surface tension to it, so it doesn't do great in this pen. I've tried this with some Iroshizuku inks, and it seems to like those a little bit better. I get a bit more railroading with this pen than I have, or with this particular ink in this pen than I have with any other ink. So I suspect there's some surfactant or something in there that keeps it from having a lot of surface tension. Just a guess, though. And then finally, we have a Pilot Parallels, and I really don't know how to write with these, 3.8 millimeter. So nice, big, wide strokes here. So there you go. So that's how this ink behaves in these different pens. Gives you a sense, it is a pretty standard red. That this color to me is really reminiscent of the color of the ink that your teachers used to use when they were marking your papers down. It's probably one of the reasons why I don't have the best mental association with the color red. That, and although you cannot tell, I used to be a redhead, and redheads and the color red surprisingly don't work real well together, because that auburny orange color that my hair used to be in red was not a good match clothing wise. So I didn't get along with red very much. So not one of my favorite colors. But I do want to show you this. This is kind of interesting. So this is the chromatography that I did with the ink. And you can see down here that there's a little bit of a blue trail that gets left behind, and the ink is very similar in color, almost all the way up to the very corners, and you get kind of a very dark blackish red and some magenta in the corners there. But it's a pretty uniform ink otherwise. Now, I will say that in terms of reds, this red does tend to have just a little hint of a bluish undertone, and you'll really see that in one of the papers that we do. Some reds have a little bit of orangey undertone to them, or a brownish undertone. This is a little bit cooler red than other reds that I have tried. So you'll see that as we get into some of the full writing samples. I should also probably mention that the full writing samples have changed. The format's changed a little bit. I was afraid that on previous samples I was seeing bleed through on paper that it's very difficult to get bleed through on. And I was worried that perhaps sending the paper through the laser printer to print the actual template on the paper was messing with the sizing of the paper. So I wanted to use untouched paper to give you a better example of what it would look like if you're not running your paper through a laser printer first. So here is our Rhodia dot pad. This is kind of the standard by which I measure all of my inks. You can see there's some interesting shading here. A little bit of depth and motion in the sample here, but nothing too crazy. Again, it starts to be a little on the pinkish side here, but you can see the blue there in a way that you sometimes can't in the more deeply saturated pieces. And then once you get past this first pass, the difference between the second and third pass is pretty minor. You can see the different writing down here. Some dry times are a little bit better than average, but not great on this paper. I mean, usually it's 20 to 25 seconds for most inks on Rhodia, has been my experience. So there you go. No bleed through. Okay color. This color is just a little bit, it's average for me, maybe a little north of average, but nothing too like amazing. Very little feathering, almost none. This ink does not feel particularly lubricated to me. It feels a little dry. So not a super lubricated ink. Better than average saturation, average shading, almost no sheen to speak of, and pretty good on the show through. There's not too much show through. In terms of water resistance, you can see that the drip test, which I drip water and let it sit for about 30 seconds, takes most of the color off, but it is still legible underneath, kind of gray. And then the rub test takes out most of the color as well. And then there's the rest of the ink. And to show you the back side of that paper, you can see a little bit of show through, but there's no bleed, even on the really wet, the flex writing and the 3.8 millimeter. So that's the Rhodia paper. Then if we move on to Tomoe River, this is an ink that I feel like works best on Tomoe River, particularly on the cream Tomoe River. I got the best looking ink test on this paper. So you can see there's a little bit more motion in the swatch up here, and the shading's just a touch less defined than it is on here. And as the ink has cured, this was a little bit warmer, but as the ink has cured, it's actually cooled off a little bit and moved a bit more toward blue. I'm actually seeing just a touch more of the warmth of the red in the Rhodia. But that wasn't the case initially when I first did the test. That seems to have happened over a little bit of time. Again, here are your different pens. Ignore the smudges. There is a little bit of bleed through on this, which again surprised me. You can see a little bit of bleed through on Tomoe River. It's very difficult to get bleed on Tomoe River, I've found. In terms of color, again, nothing too spectacular. It's just kind of a little better than average. Feathering, no feathering. Saturation, this does seem to be about as saturated on Tomoe River as on Rhodia. Shading, you're looking at just a touch less. Sheen, just a touch more. And there's not a lot of sheen on this ink. There's a little bit of a dark purple-blue halo in pooling areas, but it's not a sheen in the traditional sense. Show-through, because there is some bleeding, the show-through's not quite as good. And again, not particularly lubricated. Here we've got the dry times. It was almost dry by 20 seconds, but fully dry by 25. So, and then on the water tests, you've got, again, the drip and the rub test. The rub test was even worse on the Tomoe River than it was on Rhodia because, you know, you can see side-by-side comparisons here. At least some of the pink remained. It all came up with the rub test on the Tomoe River. And then the drip test, you saw a little bit more of the color remaining there. And finally, let's talk about the 75 GSM Staples copy paper, bottom of the rung paper. This is not a good paper for fountain pen inks. So just know that I know that, and I want to show you what it looks like on really bad paper. So right off the bat, when you compare it to the Rhodia, you're going to notice a couple of things probably. First of all, the color is much less saturated. It's bluer in hue, and you know, it's almost a pinkish, bluish pinkish color there. So, and a lot of feathering, a whole lot of feathering. So you can see right off the top, almost no shading to speak of right here. You can see the various pens. I didn't even bother with this because it was already feathery, bleedy, and not so great. Very fast dry times because the ink is absorbed right into the paper. That's a big part of the reason why it feathers so much. In terms of bleed, yeah, it bleeds pretty badly. This is right here, the medium nib on the Lamy Vista, and it bleeds even on that. And that's a fairly dry nib. So this is an ink that's going to bleed on bad paper. Color, I like this color much less on this paper than I do on the Rhodia or the Tomoe River. Not much less, but a little less. So this is below average for me. Very bad feathering. Lubrication still feels about middle of the road. Saturation, less saturated on this paper. Shading, they ain't none. Even less sheen. And show through is pretty darn bad because basically, anytime it bleeds, the show through is going to be pretty bad as well. And then the drip test, we lost a lot of ink, but it would still be legible. The rub test wasn't as bad as it was on some of the other tests. So that is my overview of Kaweco Ruby Red. It is a true red, just a hint of blue undertones, but not significant undertones. If you're looking for an ink that runs a little drier, this might be one to look for. If you're looking for an ink that behaves well on really inexpensive paper, you probably want to steer clear. This is not going to be the best ink. This ink, I feel, looks better on cream-colored papers rather than white papers, because stark white papers like Rhodia and Clairefontaine tend to bring out that blue undertone a little bit, whereas the cream-colored papers tend to keep this more in the pure red zone. So that has been my overview of Kaweco Ruby Red. Thank you again to Kaweco for providing this ink for review. If you have any questions or comments, please head over to penhabit.com. The link is down in the description below, and leave a comment there. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter. And don't forget to head over to penhabit.com and click on the support link at the top of the page to see how you can support penhabit.com and this YouTube channel. And a quick reminder for everyone who donates to the Pen Habit, for every $1 you donate between now and when the season ends, we're looking at the end of June right now for the end of the season, you will be entered to win a raffle for some of the pens I have purchased with your donated funds. And there's some good ones. There's, I can tell you right now, I know that there is a Visconti Opera Club and a Delta Fusion 82 in that list. And there's going to be a couple of others that are coming up. These are not slouch pens. Some of these pens go for $250, $300 a piece. So if you want to get in on the raffle and support the Pen Habit at the same time, please head over to penhabit.com and click on the support link there. As always, thank you for watching, and we will see you here next time on the Pen Habit. Bye.